Imagine a world where doctors believed that the shape of a plant could tell you what part of the body it could cure. Or a world where the cure for a disease was thought to come from the stars and the minerals they carried. Sounds crazy, right? But this was the reality of medicine in the 16th century. Back then, the way doctors understood the human body was more like a mix of astrology, mythology, and ancient wisdom than the scientific methods we use today. The story of how medicine evolved from these bizarre ideas to the sophisticated field it is now is fascinating and full of surprising twists. In 1618, Sir Walter Raleigh wrote, "It is evident that men differ very much in the temperature of their bodies." What he meant was that what might be a fever for one person could be normal for another. This idea was part of a broader belief system called the theory of humors. According to this theory, the human body was made up of 4 fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each person had a unique balance of these humors, and when this balance was disrupted, it led to disease. This theory was so deeply ingrained that even after the invention of the clinical thermometer, doctors still used it to diagnose and treat illnesses. The theory of humors was more than just a way to understand the body. It was a complete system that included physiology, pathology, and psychology. One of the most famous plays of the time, Ben Jonson's Every Man in His Humor, 1598, used the concept of humors to create a comedy about a jealous husband. Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, 1621, was another work that explored the idea of humors, focusing on the disorder of melancholy. This book became a classic because it touched on every aspect of human life, from health to philosophy. According to the theory of humors, disease was an imbalance of the body's elements. To cure a disease, doctors had to restore the balance of the humors. This often involved treatments like sweating, purging, bloodletting, or inducing vomiting. These methods were based on the idea that by removing excess humors, the body could return to its natural state. But this approach was not always effective, and it sometimes did more harm than good. One of the key figures who challenged the theory of humors was a doctor named Paracelsus. He lived in the 16th century and had a very different view of disease. Paracelsus believed that the cause of a disease was not an imbalance of the body's humors, but something specific outside the body, like a mineral or a poison. He called these causes minerals and poisons born from the stars in the atmosphere. This idea was revolutionary because it suggested that diseases had specific causes that could be identified and treated. Paracelsus was also a critic of the traditional herbal remedies that doctors used. He believed that doctors should use all the resources that God had created, including minerals and metals, to cure diseases. He argued that every disease had its own specific cure, and that doctors should not limit themselves to the remedies allowed by ancient texts. For example, he supported the use of mercury to treat syphilis, even though many doctors considered mercury to be dangerous. Paracelsus also believed in the popular doctrine of signatures, which held that the shape or color of a plant could suggest the organ it was meant to cure. For instance, the orchid might be good for ills of the testicles, and a yellow plant might be good for liver diseases. He respected folk remedies and encouraged doctors to try them, unlike his more conventional colleagues. Another important aspect of Paracelsus' work was his study of occupational diseases. He had a deep understanding of the lives of miners and metal workers, having worked in the mining town of Villach in southern Austria as a young man. He observed the working conditions of miners and noted the special ailments they faced, such as lung diseases and stomach ulcers caused by the air they breathed and the minerals they handled. He even accurately described the symptoms of mercury poisoning and developed treatments for it. While Paracelsus was making these groundbreaking observations, the medical establishment was still deeply entrenched in the ideas of an ancient Greek physician named Galen. Galen lived in the 2nd century AD and was one of the most influential medical writers of all time. His works were so extensive that they filled 20 thick volumes in modern editions. Galen believed that knowledge was cumulative and that each generation built on the work of the previous one. He made important contributions to anatomy, physiology, and the study of the pulse, and he was known for his brilliant diagnostic skills. However, as Galen's works became more widely known, they also became rigid dogma. Galenism, the medical philosophy based on Galen's teachings, dominated European medicine for over 1,000 years. Doctors relied on Galen's texts, rather than direct observation and experimentation. They believed that the human body had not changed since Galen's time, and that if a dissected body did not match Galen's descriptions, it was because the body had degenerated. The Renaissance, which is often credited with the birth of modern science, actually reinforced Galenism in some ways. The revival of interest in ancient Greek texts led to the publication of Galen's works in both Latin and Greek. The first printed Greek edition of Galen's works was published in 1525 by the Aldine Press in Venice. This edition had a profound impact on European medicine, as doctors now had access to the original texts in their purest form. But instead of encouraging innovation, it often led to pedantry. Doctors focused on interpreting Galen's words, rather than conducting new experiments. One of the leading proponents of Galenism was Jacobus Sylvius, a professor of anatomy at the University of Paris. Sylvius taught that Galen was always right, and that the most important contribution to medical knowledge was a more accurate translation of Galen's works. He and other Galenists believed that the human body had changed over time, and that the ideal form seen by Galen no longer existed. This belief led to some absurd conclusions, such as the idea that the human body had degenerated since ancient times. Despite the dominance of Galenism, there were a few brave souls who dared to challenge the status quo. One of them was Andreas Vesalius, a Flemish anatomist who is often called the father of modern anatomy. Vesalius studied medicine in Paris, and later became a professor of anatomy at the University of Padua. He was one of the first doctors to conduct detailed dissections of the human body and to publish his findings. His most famous work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, published in 1543, was a groundbreaking text that corrected many of Galen's errors. Vesalius showed that the human body was different from the animals Galen had dissected, and that many of Galen's descriptions were inaccurate. Vesalius' work was a major step forward in the study of human anatomy, but it was not without controversy. Many Galenists attacked him for challenging the authority of Galen. However, Vesalius' detailed illustrations and accurate descriptions of the human body eventually won the day, and his work laid the foundation for modern anatomy. The story of medicine is a story of constant evolution. From the ancient theory of humors to the revolutionary ideas of Paracelsus and the groundbreaking work of Vesalius, each step forward was a challenge to the established order. The shift from a focus on ancient texts to direct observation and experimentation was slow and often met with resistance. But it was this shift that ultimately led to the modern scientific approach to medicine. Today, we take for granted the sophisticated tools and techniques that doctors use to diagnose and treat diseases. We know that diseases are caused by specific pathogens, and we have a wide range of effective treatments. But it is important to remember the long and often difficult journey that led us to this point. The ideas of Sir Walter Raleigh, the theory of humors, the revolutionary insights of Paracelsus, and the anatomical discoveries of Vesalius are all part of the rich history of medicine. They remind us that progress in science is not always straightforward, but it is always driven by the courage to question and the determination to seek the truth.